I'm Gurcharan Das. I'm privileged to be the general editor of a history series from Penguin called The Story of Indian Business. The 11th volume in our series is called The Dharma of Business. The first 10 volumes have already come out and are available in this attractive red box. And with me today is Professor Donald Davis, who is the author of this volume. He is a professor at the University of Austin, Texas, and he has worked deeply with Patrick Olivelle, one of the world's authorities on the Dharma Shastras. So, a good place to begin is, what is the meaning of Dharma?
It's such a big question, my friend. Dharma is a complex word, as you know. In the Dharma Shastras, Dharma's primary meaning is something like the duties and responsibilities that we all have to each other, but also to our identities and our pasts. And Dharma is a way of organizing a moral universe in human society.
In other words, doing the right thing
doing
is
the right
uppermost in the minds of people. Whether the right thing is based on what criteria,
right,
that's a different one. But everybody tries to do the right thing,
right,
so that you can sleep well at night.
And learning how to discover what the right thing is, which is the difficulty of figuring all of this out,
good.
as you said. Exactly, right.
Don, how does Dharma help us to understand the modern business world?
It seems that modern business tries to depersonalize what commerce and markets are all about, to take the realia of people's lives, the fact that they're real human beings, and to treat them not as people, but as simply as consumers and sellers and this kind of thing. And I think the focus on Dharma and looking at the Dharma Shastra literature of ancient and medieval India gives us insight into the fact that it's always real people with real relationships to each other who are transacting business.
But now, the way we think of business is profit maximization, that individuals acting in self-interest, transacting, and there's very little concern about doing the right thing. It's doing the thing that I need to do to make the most profit. So what does Dharma, in the context of the market, tell us?
Well, first of all, Dharma doesn't inhibit the profit motive in any thoroughgoing way. But what it does do is suggest that more often what matters for us primarily is the relationships that are the foundation of our business. And with good relationships come even more profits. So that a businessman who's scared of forming of doing things too personally, or of doing the right thing in a business context, is probably undermining his own business rather than enhancing it. And the way that the texts talk about it, for example, is when one example that I use in the book is when somebody who has yarn or thread needs to get it woven into a carpet or clothing or something like that, they have to deposit that for some time with the weaver. They have certain expectations of the weaver, that the weaver will border it properly and take care of it. And what happens then is that a relationship is formed between the supplier of raw materials and the weaver, and the person who's taking that down the production road, yeah, to ultimately to the marketplace. And so behind the scenes, there's a series of relationships that are grounded in trust, but in mutual expectation and mutual responsibility.
So it's the same kind of trust, for example, that a taxi driver has. When you enter a taxi, he doesn't immediately ask you to produce your wallet first to show him that you have the money.
Right.
He trusts you. Similarly, trillions of dollars are transacted every day in the world, yeah, based on that trust. People don't sign contracts for every time they buy something. So the idea of Dharma as trust in the marketplace underlying the transaction, that you and I believe that both of us share certain values
Yes.
of Dharma, and therefore we can do the transaction.
Right. As you well know, the business has many different aspects. There's more to business than just the seller-consumer relationship. There's also the production side, and so when the texts that I look at talk about partners, for example, or the relationship between employers and employees, what they emphasize time and again is that each partner has a set of expectations that they can rely on from the other. That there's a set of norms or a set of standards that they can use to trust each other. Similarly with employers and employees, even though one is in charge, so to speak, the employee still has expectations that he can draw upon in relating to the employer.
And this is Dharma.
And this is Dharma, right?
Yeah.
Taking the frameworks of who we are as members of particular communities and realizing that our relationships vary from context to context.
Right.
Two partners will relate to each other in a different way than an employer and an employee, but they still manage to have a set of mutual expectations that the texts try to emphasize.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that has struck me over time, and particularly when I was reading your book, there is in the market system an inbuilt sense of Dharma underlying. If an employer consistently treats an employee well, then he gets a reputation outside, and good people from IITs, IIMs will prefer to join his company rather than a competitive company.
Absolutely.
So in the same way, in my introduction to this book, I tell the story of a mango seller in Khan Market, and she once was selling me mangoes, and she misclaimed. She said these mangoes are terrific, that's why they're so expensive.
Right.
Well, I went home and they were very bad. And I told all my friends. And soon they also had the same experience, and they said, so we all went to her competitor.
Yeah.
So a seller who misclaims about the virtues of his or her product does suffer from the market, from a competitive market. So there is an underlying Dharma in
Right.
the market system,
Right.
something that Marx never realized.
Yeah. I think you and I agree that the foundations of really making a business grow in a long-term sense rather than with a short-term gain is to cultivate those kinds of not just a maximization of profit, but a way in which the connections with other people that you build within a business become the network upon which profits grow even more.
Well, the other example of long-termism is the relationship between a supplier and a customer, that every customer has a tendency in the competitive market to squeeze the supplier.
Right.
You know? And ultimately, if you squeeze the supplier too hard, you suffer because the vendor will only deliver something that he can afford to deliver. So the part that he will give you will be substandard, and you will suffer. So therefore, the idea that Dharma underlies the market transaction in an organic way, I think is something that your book brings out very well.
Absolutely, and it goes to an issue that I raise in the book about the distinction between lab and lob.
Yes.
And this idea that there's nothing inherently bad about lab, right? There's nothing inherently bad about profit and making money as a natural part of doing business. But when lab or laba shades into loba, this becomes
when self-interest becomes greed.
That's right. Right. So the cardinal sin for a lot of the Dharma Shastra texts is this lob.
You know, ever since we had this socialist period in our economy, profit became a dirty word in our country. And only after the reforms we've tried to restore it. And it's very reassuring that the Dharma Shastras recognize labh as a legitimate thing. Let me finally ask you, Donald, does business have a greater purpose than profit maximization? What do the Dharma Shastras say about that?
I think the way in which Dharma in a more general sense and Dharma in the context of business relate to one another is that the idea is that there is always a proper way to be with one another. And what we can draw from the Dharma Shastras is a sense that we must develop firm and productive relationships with one another as a part of business. So it uses a model, in a sense, of a functioning society as a way to think about what business actually is.
And of course, I mean, it's one of the purusharthas, one of the aims of life is artha. And artha means, one of the meanings of artha is business.
Business and success in
so it's a goal of life.
Right.
And so it fits into a purpose, doesn't it?
Yes, it's part of the good life overall, I think, right?
Part of the good life.
And it's a fascinating thing to see that there's a balance inherent in the conceptualization of the goals of mankind. That right?
And let me ask finally, Don, the role of the state.
Right.
We keep debating talk about the regulators of the market, of capitalism. What do the Dharma Shastras tell us about the government's role?
Right. Well, the emphasis within the Dharma Shastras is that the state has an obligation, but also a privilege to promote the welfare and the livelihood of its people. But the way that it does this is to promote the commerce that people are already engaged in. So rather than inhibiting and restricting markets, rather than telling people exactly what prices should be, this sort of thing, the government should take a modest approach to taxing people. You and I have talked about the Shadbhaga, the sixth part that the king is entitled to, as a reasonable tax.
Just to clarify for our viewers, in the Arthashastra, the king is told that keep the tax rate moderate, and he offers the notion of Shatbhaga. You don't own the land, you don't own the produce, Mr. King, you have a share. And Shatbhaga means 1/6. 1/6 is today the tax rate of Singapore.
So the state should promote business is the basic idea, right? And that's an important point, I think, to draw away from Dharma.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm very glad we've had this opportunity.
The pleasure is mine.
To chat, and good luck with the book.
Thank you very much.